There is not a single part of me that will ever fear death again, because it is the most beautiful, miraculous, love-filled homecoming. It wasn't anything that you would think of as being scary or uncomfortable. It was bliss. It was like being home. It was like this awareness and this knowing that I'm connected to this oneness, and I'm as much a part of it as it is a part of me, and there is no separating it. I was in this place of absolute beauty and love and connection. I didn't have any desire to come back. There was really no awareness of my physical life while I was there. As I'm expanding into this oneness, I am suddenly snapped back into my body. I opened my eyes and I was very disoriented. All I remember in that moment was this desire to hold on to this infinite connection, this love, because it felt like sand through my hands just slipping away. And no matter how much I was grappling to hold on to it and to go back, it was like the veil, the aperture was closing. My name is Anastasia Wesselink-Mullering. I grew up in very rural Michigan in just absolute poverty, in a family that was pretty toxic and abusive, unfortunately. Imagine that you get off your school bus knowing that you may not have a meal that night. Depending on the day or the month, you may not have electricity. You may not have a telephone. We didn't have neighbors and community like urban areas. So there really wasn't anybody that I could reach out to. And being an only child in that environment with very few resources around me, I was really left to defend for myself. Coming out of that experience, I wanted to make sure that I could provide for myself and for my children. And so climbing the corporate ladder is what we're told is how we can be the most successful. And so that was really my focus. I got married early in my 20s and had my first child. And then later on in my later 20s, I had my second child. And we ended up moving from Michigan to Chicago. And that's really where my corporate career took off. Went from, an individual contributor, I guess you'd call it, in a corporation, all the way up to vice president. They say when you come from an abusive home, particularly one that is riddled with alcoholism, that either you yourself become an alcoholic or you become a workaholic. There's one of two paths for you, and I took the workaholic route. I was a very involved mother, soccer mom, soccer coach, PTA. I wanted to be everything for my children that I didn't have. And so I focused every ounce of my energy on being able to give them the life that they deserved. I was very, very busy in life. My career was thriving. My kids were involved in a lot of activities. I was go, go, go. And the things that pop up in life are the things that are the most mundane, the doctors, the dentists, the things that we have to take care of. And just like, those things that we maybe ignore for a little too long, that happened to me. And I found myself in a very invasive dental procedure that ultimately changed the course of my life. In December of 2019, I went in for this really unusual and invasive procedure. It was a multi-step procedure that was going to take several hours. The dentist got me situated in the dental chair and put a mask over my face to give me some gas to relax my body, to put me in what I call a state of twilight. That's where you're not completely unconscious, but yet you're not fully aware. You're in this in-between place, which makes a procedure that is as invasive as the one I was having more comfortable and bearable. And while I was being prepped, the dentist, went about the business of getting whatever he was doing prepared. So he had his back turned to me. He was, on a counter that was next to the dentist chair. And I started to have this very unusual sensation. I began to experience this feeling of coming up out of my body when I was breathing and then falling right back into it. And the next breath, I would rise back up again, and I would fall back into my body. And each time that this happened, it felt like I was rising up higher and higher and falling back in just abruptly. Having never had a procedure like this before, I wasn't sure if this was normal. Should I say something? I took one more breath, and my entire body it rose up, and it felt like I was floating 2 or 3 feet above my body. And I thought to myself, I should probably say something. And with that, I was no longer in my body. I was in the ceiling looking down at my body. And I thought to myself, what am I doing up here? Now, on the surface, this seems like a really logical question to ask. But think about the implications of that statement. I'm not in my body, but I am this other part of myself that I'm completely aware that I identify with. And I'm up there saying, why am I up here? Meaning I didn't identify with the body below at all. What I identified with, who I really was and am, was this part of me that was in the ceiling, looking down at my physical body. Now, all the anxiety that I was experiencing as I was going through this uncomfortable and unusual rising and falling, that was gone. And actually, I could probably have cared less about the body down there. I knew it was mine, and I could identify that it was a physical body, but I had no connection to it whatsoever. And my next thought was, am I dead? And with those two thoughts combined, I flipped upside down, and I am now staring inches from the ceiling tiles. I had this awe about the dust and the cracks in the ceiling tiles. They were miraculous. They were beautiful. They were just something that I felt like I could have sat and stared at for hours. It was like a little kid in Disneyland. You wouldn't think something so mundane would be something so beautiful. But reflecting back on it, the reason it was so beautiful was because I was looking at it through the eyes of my soul. I like to say I had my eyes closed, or an aperture came down, and I was gone. I was no longer in the dentist office. When I opened my eyes, I was in this buttery, warm, rich, cozy, blissful, complete place that paradoxically was also dark and what I call the void. I call it the void because when I opened my eyes, I was in absolute darkness. I didn't have any points of light around me. I couldn't see anything that I could distinguish, but it wasn't anything that you would think of as being scary or uncomfortable. It was bliss. It was like being home. It was like this awareness and this knowing that I'm connected to this oneness, this bliss, this completeness, and I'm as much a part of it as it is a part of me, and there is no separating it. That love, that that thing that is so hard to describe. Even the most beautiful experiences that we have here in our physical bodies, the birth of a child, falling in love, these are incredibly loving experiences. Even that pales in comparison to the completeness of the unconditional love that you experience on the other side. There was no thought process. When you experience it, it becomes a part of you. It becomes a knowing. And so I call this place the oneness, because it was really clear to me in this place that it represented every single soul that had ever and will ever exist, and that in this place, all experiences of every soul were absolutely accessible. I try to find the analogy to explain just the vastness of this place. Imagine every single experience that every single soul on planet Earth has ever had and will ever have. So right now we have 8 billion people on this planet, but there's been people before us and there will be people after us. Imagine all of those experiences, all those collective experiences, decades of experiences of all of those souls. And imagine all of them were to reside on one grain of sand. And then imagine all of the grains of sand on just this planet alone. And all those other grains of sand represent all the experiences that the soul has outside of their experience here on Earth. That just begins to scrape the surface of how vast this place of oneness and completeness was. It was as if I was expanding into it. I was having this connection to all of these experiences of all of these souls on Earth and otherwise. And I was a part of it. And all of those experiences were a part of me. And because there's no time, there isn't a past or a present. There just was. There was just that moment where all of those experiences were available completely and totally. What I couldn't do was form a question. I couldn't form why does this happen in life, or why does that happen? Because that part of you that's connected knows the answers there. And all you have to do is bring it into your awareness. All I could do was be curious. I found myself expanding into this completeness, expanding into this oneness, and becoming a part of it more and more. And as I was being curious about something and I was bringing it back, I found myself being more and more curious. I wanted to know more and more. And what I've been able to discover now that I'm back is that the infinite knowing isn't something I could bring back into this physical life. There's aspects of it that I brought back that were very clear that I could hold on to, but there's other pieces of it that I feel like it's going to take my entire life to process and to connect to and understand. I was in this place of absolute beauty and love and connection. I didn't have any desire to come back. There was really no awareness of my physical life while I was there. As I'm expanding into this oneness, I am suddenly snapped back into my body. I opened my eyes and I was very disoriented. All I remember in that moment was this desire to hold on to this infinite connection, this love, because it felt like sand through my hands just slipping away, and no matter how much I was grappling to hold on to it and to go back, it was like the veil, the aperture was closing. There is not a single part of me that will ever fear death again, because it is the most beautiful, miraculous, love-filled homecoming. My dentist was over top of me, very concerned. And what I find so interesting about my experience is, I don't know if I was gone for a very short moment or if I was gone for several minutes, because on the other side, you can live, it feels like an entire lifetime. And yet the time that's passed in the physical could be 10 seconds. Following that, I was on a search for what happened to me. Many might consider like an out-of-body experience or something that would be drug-induced. I had those experiences before, and they were incredibly different than anything that I experienced on the other side. This experience created a knowing within me that I didn't have before, and nothing can undo that knowing. It wasn't until days, weeks, months, years after that, through the process of connecting to IANS, which is the International Association of Near-Death Studies, and connecting to those groups and research, that I was able to even put a term to it. I have since become just a voracious consumer of all near-death stories. I find them fascinating. The commonalities between them are really apparent. There's, plenty of people out there that have researched them, doctors that have written books about them. And yet, despite the commonalities that exist across all these NDEs, there's still pieces of every story that are different. There's still an element of one's experience that doesn't align exactly with somebody else's experience. And I often get asked that question: how is it that your experience is different than, another NDEr's experience? And I like to compare it to physical life. Your physical life is going to be different than somebody else's physical life, or somebody else. No two people have the exact same experiences as humans. So why would we all have the exact same experience on the other side? Our experiences are going to be unique to us. But just like there's a commonality of human experience, we all are born, we go through these trials and tribulations, these joys. We feel this, pull towards something that's greater than ourselves. There's that common element on the other side of who we really are as well. And that is what unifies us together, the what I would call that oneness that I was connected to, that we all share. Yet we don't just merge into this infinite void where we don't have any individual point of consciousness. We have this ability to have our own point of awareness, but yet also have this greater connection to everything. One of the things that I often get asked was, did I experience God? The challenge with that is, God can be a term that we personify. It can be this image that we create of something that we relate to in a physical life. I would define God, after my experience, very differently. I wouldn't define it as something that we can personify. I would actually describe it more as a verb rather than a noun. It is this essence, this love in action, this movement, and it's not something that is static. It's not a person, a place, or a thing. It is something that represents motion and love and the element of completeness, which just isn't a static thing. I truly believe that this is an experience I'm going to be processing for the rest of my life. I've been 5 years post-experience. There are still aha moments that I have about the experience, or I find a new way to describe or compare it to something so that I can more clearly articulate, not only for somebody else, but also for myself, what I experienced. And I'd say the biggest shift or change in my life after my experience was the fact that over the next couple years, I began to find that I wasn't quite as driven in my corporate job. I wasn't quite as interested in the idea of climbing the corporate ladder, of finding the success that I was so driven to have before. As a matter of fact, I ended up resigning from my corporate job, and I opened up a wellness studio that was focused strictly on helping people connect and find that soul part of themselves. Although we have words like NDE, near-death experience, I don't know that it necessarily always accurately describes it, because there are individuals who have these really profound experiences that weren't even in a compromised medical situation like I was, but they might have been in a deep meditation and they go to the other side. I think our ability to access that other side, that part of ourselves, that soul part of ourselves, I don't want us to limit that is only accessible to people who die, like have to be resuscitated or are, connected to a heart rate machine, and that the only way you can have this beautiful experience is if you also have this very traumatic experience at the same time. There is a connection that is there for all of us, and my hope through sharing these stories is that it not only brings awareness to the fact that that connection is there, but maybe it sparks the curiosity in those that are listening, that they want to find out how to have that connection. They want to deepen that connection without having to die to get to it. I had developed a very frequent meditation practice after my NDE. I found myself drawn to being in that place of stillness more and more. Over the course of many years, that meditation practice has evolved into using more sound to help myself get into that place of connection. But I am nowhere near the connection that I had on the other side. One of the things that can be difficult to talk about as an NDEer is there is a time, and it happened to me about 2 years ago, where you go into a feeling of depression almost, because that longing to be a part of that connection is so strong, and everything in your life just pales in comparison. You can still fall into that very human place of despair. And it can be hard to talk about that, because from the outside looking in, somebody can say, how is it you can be depressed when you've had this beautiful experience? You have all of this knowing, you understand things that other people don't understand. Why are you depressed? And it's because there is such a stark contrast. There is this awareness of something that is so beautiful, and yet there's also your immediate experience of being human. And to try to integrate that and balance that takes time. It takes patience, and it takes a level of self-love to know that even though I'm experiencing this very human thing right now, I also know simultaneously that that's not who I am, that that's my human experience, and who I am was this part of me that's unconditional love that I connected to on the other side. That's the real me. Throughout the course of my childhood, I always found myself asking what was the purpose of life. That was a very natural question to ask, given that I was experiencing everything that I was experiencing. It didn't seem like life had any meaning or value at that time. And coming back from my NDE, I can say without a shadow of a doubt, I don't question what the reason of life is anymore. Our purpose for being here is to experience, and ultimately to experience unconditional love. I love to paint, so when I'm in the middle of a painting and I'm completely in the flow and I am in this place where time just zips by, at no point in time would I stop and ask myself, I wonder what the meaning of life is. And so you have your own individual response to everything that you experience in your life. Some people call it intuition. Some people call it a gut feeling. That's your soul guiding you. So now I don't take them for granted. I try to become very aware of them. I try to slow down. It's not a race. There is no ultimate goal. In this physical body, we are not here to learn any lessons. And there is no getting this life wrong. And the reason being is because that soul part of us, that part that I connected to, the oneness, the completeness, it is just that. It's already complete. There is nothing that we can do in this physical life that is going to take away from or add to the soul. So to take this physical life that is just such a brief moment and to put this pressure on ourselves that there's things that we have to do right and there's things that we have to avoid getting wrong because it may impact our experience on the other side, meaning we may go to a heaven or we may go to a hell if we don't get this life right. It just absolutely wasn't part of my experience. It wasn't part of the knowing that I brought back from the other side. We are here in this physical body because our soul just wants to know what it is like to have this physical experience. All of the senses that we have in our physical body is what our soul wants to connect to. Tastes and sight and sounds and feelings. And as a matter of fact, I would say that the feeling, the part of us that isn't emotion, that isn't, seeking pleasure or trying to avoid pain, but that part of us that's still part of us, that is a state of being, that is the language of our soul. We're all striving to feel something. We're all striving to get to this place of love and joy and contentment. And we're kind of like a pinball machine sometimes. We're looking for that experience or that relationship that's going to give us that fulfillment. When we strip all the things away in our lives, when we strip away the career or the house or the car, and if we find that that fulfillment is not there, then there's a deeper part of ourselves that we have yet to connect to. It's that soul part of ourselves. Because when we can connect to the soul, then it's no longer about any of those external things, because what you feel inside is so complete that you bring value to the things that you do versus looking for value to yourself from your external world.